are. It's a new year coming our way, but we're kind of in that week between Christmas and New Year's. The dust is settling, and we've got the holiday coming up, still one more to go. We're not quite ready to get back into our routine, not quite ready to jump into a new teaching series, which means I get to teach on whatever I want. And so I'm going to today. One of the questions I get asked, though, sometimes, that's a great question. Someone will say, where's God got you right now in Scripture, Jason? What's God teaching you? Where are you hanging out, maybe in the Bible? And it's a good question because really it's one we should all be able to answer. I encourage all of us to have a private time with God. I encourage all of us to be reading the Bible and learning more. But as you ask me, I would say I've been hanging out in Matthew chapter 5 quite a bit recently. It's a big chapter. There's a lot going on in this chapter. When you get to this point in Matthew, Jesus has been baptized. He went out to the wilderness and was tempted for 40 days. He comes out, he picks his disciples, he heals some people. But when we get to chapter 5 in Matthew, we get Jesus' first sermon. We get his first recorded teaching. And so I've been hanging out in there because it's in this part of Scripture that he talks more and more about this thing called the kingdom that he talks about all the time and what these kingdom people look like more and more. And I'm just asking that question, God, talk to me. What more and more does it look like to be a kingdom citizen, ambassador for the world, to shine my light for others? And so I want to share a little bit today of what I'm discovering in Matthew chapter 5, but in particular, a portion of it kind of stood out to me. There's a portion of Matthew 5 where Jesus about 6 different times says something along the lines of, you have heard it said that blank. And he goes on from there. I think that's interesting because as we talk about moving into a new year, we think about kind of goals and where are we headed in this new year. It's a great thing when Jesus says you've heard it said that, because what he's saying is this is something you probably know. What I'm about to talk about, you've probably heard this somewhere. But in our lives, we get busy, we get distracted, and sometimes we forget things, right? Or if we don't forget them, sometimes they get kind of jumbled up in the arguments and interpretations, and there's a lot of those out there. And so sometimes what was clear is no longer clear. And what Jesus is saying is either A, I'm trying to remind you of something you've probably heard before, or B, I'm going to refocus or realign you to what the original meaning was in this, or how it was meant to be interpreted. And so Jesus is even in this passage elevating himself above all other teachers. And he's saying, I am the ultimate teacher. I am going to teach you and recalibrate you to understand this from God's perspective. Which is great as we march into this new year. We should be asking questions like that. Like, what are those things we need to remember as we go into the new year? But even asking, what are those things in our lives we need to recalibrate to point towards God so that we can live the life that he is teaching us and that we are learning to live to become more like Jesus Christ. That's what's going on. And so I thought this was a great place in this in-between week to just talk from Jesus' perspective. What would he want us to know? What would he want to remind us or recalibrate in our lives? Y'all ready to jump in? Let's do it. Matthew chapter 5, verse 21, Jesus starts with this. He says, you have heard it, that it is said to the people long ago, you shall not murder. I just want to check real quick. Who's heard that you should not murder before? Most people out there. I just wanted to do a litmus test there real quick. You shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, Rakah, is answerable to the court. And anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell. Boy, that's some heavy stuff right there. What is Jesus trying to say? And we have to understand it more and more as we do. We talk about this when we study Scripture. We have to put ourselves in the audience's perspective. In other words, a first century Jewish person's perspective to fully understand this verse. But one of the other methods I like as we learn more and more about how to study and read our Bible is to pick out words that kind of stand out. And for me, what are a couple different words in this passage that stand out? Well, a couple different words. The first one is angry. I notice he says But I tell you, anyone who is angry, he went from murder to angry at that point. And then he also says twice, anyone who says. And so we have to ask ourselves, why these words? What is it Jesus is trying to say here? And I think I would start by this. Do you know anybody who is an angry person? Just kind of the nature of their life. I'm not talking about getting angry from time to time. We all get angry. And you know what? There are some things that should make us angry. When we see injustice in the world, when we see unfairness in the world, there's a healthy anger that should come from saying, hey, that's not right. And that's not what we're talking here. That's actually more what I would call righteous indignation is where that falls. That's not what I'm talking about when I say angry. I'm saying, are there people that you know in your life, when you look at just kind of the overall flavor of their life, they seem angry a lot. They seem angry all the time. They're shaking their fist at the world. Maybe that's you. Do you know anybody that just has really bad temper and suffers from having a temper? I do. Go ahead and admit it at that point. It's something my whole life, especially when I get tired. I have to watch when I'm tired or stressed out. You got to watch that. We've all got our stuff that we have to do. But let me ask a different question. Have you ever said something when you were angry that you regret? Anybody raise your hand if you said something that you regret. Okay, about 80% of you. The other 20% can repent after the service. All right? Reality is, most of us have said something in anger that we have come to regret later on. And that's a little bit what's going on here. Be careful in your anger about what you say, is what Jesus is saying. But we're like, I don't fully understand this, because you could say to a brother or sister, rakah, and you're like, okay, but we need to understand what rakah is. A couple of things you need to know. It's the only time in Scripture this word appears. So this is the one place in Scripture that rakah appears. Another thing we need to understand is that Matthew was originally written in ancient Greek, but this is not a Greek word. It's actually an Aramaic word. Aramaic was the street language, what people talked on the streets at that time. If you ever watched The Passion of the Christ, that was in Aramaic. That Jesus was speaking in. So it was the language of the streets. In many ways, this is street talk. It's slang. Most scholars believe this would probably fall into the category of a cuss word in their language. Not that any of you have ever cussed, but I've heard other churches that's a problem. So, yeah. But this probably falls under the category of a curse word. And the literal meaning of rakah in the original language means empty-headed. Now, the equivalent of that in our modern language would be calling someone stupid or calling them an idiot, which is not a nice thing to do. It's not nice to call someone stupid or an idiot, but it still doesn't fully pick up on the nuances of what's going on here. Because in our culture, it really isn't that big a deal to call someone stupid or idiot. People call me that all the time. So, I mean, it just is what it is. But back then, words were a really big deal. And you did not call someone stupid or an idiot. And if you did, those were fighting words. At that point, you're messing with an East Sider. All right? All right? You don't go and say, rakah, to somebody back in that day. It's equivalent of saying you're a stupid idiot to them. Jesus saying, don't do it. Even when you're angry, don't go and do that. And then he continues on, he says, in fact, anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell. You're like, good grief, what's going on there? But again, we have to put ourselves in a first century context to understand. And a Jewish person at this time understood the Old Testament. They were required to learn it as kids. And they would have known, and the verses that would have come to mind would have been one like Psalm 53:1, which says, the fool says in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt and their ways are vile. This is in several verses in the Old Testament. And essentially what's going on here, so that you understand this passage, is to call a person in the first century, a Jewish person in the first century, a fool is equivalent to saying you are godless. You're basically telling them you are a godless person. And again, we still don't necessarily pick up on that in our modern culture, because like, you can call me that all you want, it doesn't matter. We don't fully understand that, but it was a really big deal back then. Publicly, the words you used were a big deal. And if we think about it, while we enjoy some freedom of speech here in this country, there are parts of this world, particularly some strict Muslim countries, that if you walked in and called someone godless, you would be in some serious danger. Not only may you go to court, your life could be on the line for that. That's more the picture of what you need to understand what Jesus is talking about when he says, don't say to someone, Rakan, don't say you fool. You're calling them godless and you're calling them a stupid idiot. Don't do that. But really, what is the principle here as we go into this new year that we need to remember? What is Jesus ultimately telling us? And I believe ultimately what he's telling us, and it's your first fill-in for the day, is this. Angry words destroy others. Angry words destroy others. It's not sticks and stones will break my bones. It's not you hurt my feelings. The Bible says in Proverbs 18:21, your words have the power of life and death. Words matter. And Jesus is saying, listen, even in your anger, even in the heat of the moment, be careful what you say. These words that you're about to speak, are they going to build someone up or are they going to tear them down? Are they going to rip them to pieces? And Jesus is saying, we don't do that. Even in our anger, even in the moment, be careful about what you say. That's my challenge to you this year. It's like, each conversation you have, even in the heat of the moment, take that moment to take a step back, take a breath, and evaluate, what am I about to say? And what effect will this have on the person I'm about to say it to? The second thing Jesus says in verse 27, he says this, you've heard it said that you shall not commit adultery. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in their heart. We've actually pointed at this verse several times in the last year as we've had to wade through some difficult conversations about pornography and sex trafficking and some other things. And we've always said at Radiant, we're not going to be afraid of the tough subjects. We're going to address those subjects because they are subjects that need to be dealt with in our culture. And so this is just a great reminder. But ultimately, I kind of want to just ask you this question. In your life, what are you looking at? What are you looking at? What has your time and attention? When you're alone and you think nobody's watching, what are you looking at? What's on your computer screen? What's on your phone? What's on your TV? I'm not trying to be legalistic here. We're just trying to understand some principles that Jesus wants us to know. And one of the first principles is this. Time and time again, we learn in the Bible, lust originates in the heart. Sin is an inward problem. It is an inward heart problem that manifests itself in our actions. Our actions don't lead to our heart leads to our actions. If you want to know what kind of person someone is, look at the overall flavor of their life and ask yourself, is it one that produces fruit for the Spirit, or is it one of destruction and debris? I'm not talking about making mistakes from time to time. We all do that. We all make mistakes, and there's grace and there's mercy that abounds. But I'm saying when you look at someone's life, their overall life, is it one that is more and more pointed to God? Yes, it might be 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but it's heading that way. The trajectory is there. Or is it one pointed somewhere else? Because from our heart, our actions come. That fruit comes from this. And more what we learn throughout the Bible is this idea, and Jesus is trying to tell us, your eyes are the gateway to your heart. What you look at, what you see. That's why we have to be careful about what we, and we think it's innocent. We think, oh, it's just a little bit. It doesn't take a lot to corrupt, to poison. So we have to be careful. And Jesus is just reminding us of that in this passage. Hey, what you look at, what has your time and attention matters. And it's not just in a marriage relationship. Oftentimes, our relationship with Jesus and the church is compared to a marriage relationship. The problem with Israel in the Old Testament is eventually God said, you have committed adultery with me. You have had other idols. You are looking at other things. You are worshiping things higher than me. And the same thing applies here. This isn't just a sexual issue. When we talk about adultery, we're also asking the question, what is it you're looking at? What has your time and attention that is distracting you away from your undivided attention of God? Do you have idols in your life? That's what's going on here. And Jesus is saying, listen, when you look lustfully, not only even at another woman or another man, or if you look lustfully at other things, that's distracting you from not only the oneness that you were designed to have in a marriage, but it's also distracting you from the oneness you're designed to have with God. Be careful what you look at. The next thing Jesus wants to tell us in verse 31 that kind of goes along with that. He says, it's been said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I tell you, anyone who divorces his wife except for sexual immorality. Now I'm going to stop right there because this wasn't in my notes, but I think this is important based on what we just talked about. The Greek word for the two words, sexual immorality there, is a Greek word porneia. Any idea what English word we get from that root word porneia? Pornography. Pornography. Now, that doesn't define the whole thing. Porneia meant many different forms of sexual immorality. But in particular, it's interesting that we get our word pornography from that root Greek word. He says, anyone who divorces his wife except for sexual immorality makes her the victim of adultery. I will tell you that these couple of verses right here have been debated, yelled, and screamed about for hundreds of years. More fights have come from trying to understand these two verses. They're just hard verses to understand. And I am not here to talk to you today about divorce and the grounds for divorce and so forth. That's not the point here. My point being, though, there is a word that stands out in this that causes us, when we ignore it, to miss what Jesus is really the big idea he's talking about in this set of verses. And we can sometimes get so much into the details of it, we forget what the large principle is that Jesus is trying to teach us here. And we say, well, what's that word that stands out in this passage? And that word is this. The word is victim. If we're not careful, we can miss that word victim in this. So let's understand it from a first century perspective about what's going on in this verse. And to understand it from that, we have to know that in the first century, it was a man's world. Men held the cards. They were in control. They were in power. Women had little to no rights at this time. And so what's going on here is that if a man wanted to get rid of a woman, discard a woman, for whatever reason, good or bad, if he wanted to, he needed to issue a certificate of divorce. But if he did not issue a certificate of divorce, it made it more and more difficult for the woman to survive in culture. See, without a certificate of divorce, she could not move on. She could not go to the next stage in life. She could not remarry. If there was a job available, she would be ostracized in the culture, so she could not get another job. Really, the only thing left for a woman to do in a situation where she couldn't get that certificate of divorce is she either had to go out in public and beg for food and money, or she had to become a prostitute, both of which are absolutely humiliating options for the woman. The man had the power. He had the control. He was holding the cards in this relationship. And if we sit here and fight about divorce and so forth, not that it's a bad conversation. We can miss the big principle of what Jesus is trying to say here. The issue isn't really divorce. The issue is power. What Jesus is saying is to all of us, for those who are in charge, for those who are leaders, for those who are bosses, managers, politicians, pastors, for those who have leadership responsibility, do not use your power. Do not use the control you have been given to victimize someone else. You do not use power. You do not use control to create victims in other people. Never do we do that as Christians. We do not oppress. We do not enslave. We do not use this as a way to get back at somebody else. And that's what's going on here. And ultimately, the principle that we need to remember in this new year that Jesus is trying to teach us, an important one for all of us, is this simple 3-word principle: do no harm. Do no harm. Do not misuse your power. And remember that if you do have any power, that power comes from God to begin with, who is the giver of all things. Do not misuse that. We do not do things to hurt others. And while that divorce illustration is a big example of what's going on and how someone can misuse their power to victimize and hurt someone else, there's many other different ways in life that we can do that as well too. But when we also start getting this idea, hey, my choices have consequences, and more, what I want you to do this new year, here's what I'm asking. I want you to ask the question more and more. This decision I'm about to make, this thing I'm about to do, how does this affect the people around me? You see, we can get caught up looking at something and going, but this looks really good, and I like this thing, and it's going to make me really happy. And sometimes we don't stop and say, but what does this do to the people around us? Even more so, what does it do even to people we don't know and don't see necessarily? See, what we buy, what we do, what we say has consequences. Even from a purchasing standpoint, we have to ask. That's one of the reasons here when you ask what kind of coffee we use Governor Coffee. One of the reasons is we wanted to use a coffee that not only builds up local villages and provides them with a income stream, but it's also organic and it's also one that we know that they are not using child labor. We know that they are not misusing the people or enslaving the people around them. It is socially acceptable. And yes, we pay a little bit more for it, but it's the right thing to do. What do you do when you find out your sneakers were made in a sweatshop? What do you do when you're buying a diamond and you find out it's a blood diamond? Do no harm. And we've got to ask the question. It's difficult. I'm asking you to walk the difficult road. But I'm asking us to be socially conscious and ask the question, this thing I'm about to do, this thing I'm about to say, or this thing I'm about to buy, how does this affect others? Ultimately, the principle Jesus is saying here is don't be selfish. That's really what's going on in the end. But this thing I'm about to do, is this going to help or be hurtful? As Christians, we do know harm, and we have to be really, really careful of that. Jesus continues. He says in verse 33, again, you've heard it said that to people long ago, do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you have made. He goes on, he says, but I tell you, do not swear an oath at all. I'm going to skip down to the bottom for time's sake. He says, all you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. Now, oaths are a part of life. When I stood before a pastor with my now wife, we took an oath to love each other in the good times and the bad, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer. There are oaths we take in life. He's not saying don't have oaths. There is meaning and purpose to having oaths. The word that stands out here is he changes from oath and he starts to use the word swear. Notice in this. And so how many of us have heard someone say, I swear to God, I'm going to do this thing. Right? I swear it. I swear it on this. I swear it on that. And let's be honest, why do we say that? If we're being honest, it's because we don't think we have any credibility. Do we? We have to swear by something else because my credibility is shot. If I had to summarize this passage, it would be this. Make your yes a yes and make your no a no. Simple, but difficult. But that's the challenge in this new year. That's what the principle is here that I think Jesus would be challenging us to. Make your yes a yes and make your no a no. In other words, be a person of honor. Be a person of honor. Have transparent integrity. Let's be known as a group of people who keep their word. Let's be known as people whose yes is a yes and no is a no. Honorable people. If you make a promise, fulfill it. If you say you're going to do something, do it. Be careful what you promise. As a team here at Radiant, man, we're working hard on this because we all are people pleasers and we want to tell them. But you know what? It doesn't always work, and it's not always helpful to just tell somebody what they want to hear, right? You gotta be careful of that. And more, we're working on this idea. Listen, let's under-promise and over-deliver. And that's just a good philosophy in life. It's a good philosophy at work, too. Under-promise, over-deliver more and more. Let's be people of honor whose yes is a yes and no is a no. And this applies at home. This applies at work. And can I pause here and say it applies here at church, too? If you agree to do something, do it. If you say yes to a schedule, honor it. Here at church, let's make our yes a yes and our no a no. Everything that happens here at Radiant happens because of volunteers. We don't have a lot of people on our payroll. We run mean and lean, my friends. Well below the national average percentage-wise of what payroll is to your general budget. Everything we do is run by leaders who are volunteer leaders just about. And they rely on every single person here when they say my yes, that yes is a yes and that no is a no. It's absolutely disheartening to get a phone call at 8 o'clock in the morning. I decided to go on vacation this week. Make our yes a yes and make our no a no. Let's be people of honor. Jesus continues in verse 38. He says, you've heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. And if someone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. This makes absolutely no sense if you don't live in the first century. See, what we have to remember in the first century is Israel had been conquered by Rome. They were an occupied nation at that time. It was not uncommon for Roman soldiers to take Jewish people or somebody out in the middle of the town square and slap them on the cheek with their glove. Mainly, maybe they did something to deserve it, but mainly just to remind you who's in control and who's in power. And the goal is exactly as it would seem, is to embarrass and belittle you. And they would do that. They'd slap them. But also we'd understand that there was kind of a little hope on the soldiers' part that you would lash back at them, that you would try to get back at them. Why? That's all the excuse they need at that point to beat you, and it's all the excuse they need to even possibly kill you in the name of self-defense at that point. And Jesus is saying, and the word that stands out here that we need to realize, the word is this: do not resist. In other words, don't get revenge. Jesus is reminding us in this life, do not get revenge. We are not the people of retaliation. We are not the people of revenge. And we've got to be careful of that, because in the heat of the moment, when someone's slapping you with a glove on the side of the face, your first thought is not, praise Jesus, I love you. Not mine. Everything inside of you wants to punch their daylights out. Jesus says that's not who we are. We are not the people of revenge. What do we look like? Well, he goes on to say, if they ask you to walk a mile, go a second mile. What's going on with that? Well, you may not know that in Roman law at that time, a soldier could ask a non-Roman citizen to carry their stuff, their pack, their equipment for about a mile. It was in the law. They could do it. It was absolutely legal to do that. The law said only about a mile. They put some restraints on it because they know they would abuse the law, but it was actually a thing. And so they would come up, they'd find somebody in their town. It's like, carry my stuff for the next mile. And Jesus is saying, if somebody does that, rather than looking at them in indignation and rather than being angry, carry it a second mile. Show them that you are something different. Show them what the love of Jesus looks like. Show them what grace and mercy looks like. That's an opportunity. When someone strikes out at you, when someone tries to belittle you, when someone tries to embarrass you, that's an opportunity for you to show them Jesus. And you say, why? Because that's what he did. When they whipped him, when they beat him, when they put a crown of thorns on him, when they accused him of things he did not do, he did not get revenge. He did not get retaliation. He said, it stops with me. And every time someone does that to us, we too have the opportunity to say, this cycle of violence, this cycle of anger, it stops with me. Why? Because it stopped with Jesus. I'm not going to get revenge. I'm not going to get retaliation. And for no reason other than grace, I'm going to show you love. That's the sort of people Jesus is challenging us to be this new year. Don't get revenge. Look for those as opportunities to show the love of Jesus and serve others. One last one Jesus had to say in verse 43. He said, you've heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Don't even the pagans do that? Interesting here. Ultimately, Jesus is saying, above all else, love. And we know that. We can kind of take it all down to a couple different things when we say, love God and love each other. That's Scripture. That's ultimately the message of Jesus Christ, that we are called to love God and we're called to love each other. And who are we called to love? We're called to love everyone. Even those people we don't want to love. You got any of those in your life? I do. But we're not allowed to discriminate, are we? Jesus says, love everyone, both friends and even more importantly, your enemy. But what's the word that stood out in this passage to me? Pray. Do you pray for your enemies? It's a hard one, isn't it? I mean, it's easy to pray for the people we love and the people we care about. It's easy to pray for friends. It's easy to pray for family. But do you pray for your enemies? And I mean a good prayer. You know, not the Lord strike them down dead in the name of Jesus. Like, do you pray and show genuine love? You say, but that's hard, Jason. It is, but notice what he said. I mean, if we're just nice to people we love, and if we just hang out and we just love on the people that are around us, aren't the taxpayers and pagans doing that? There's nothing special about that. All of us can do that. It's very easy for me to like the people that like me. It's a whole different thing than to say, wait a minute. There's that person in my life. And you know who you are. You want to know who that person is? Every time you think about them, you're replaying the next conversation you're about to have with them or the last one you had and how you're going to say it differently. I know. None of you do that, but I've heard other churches do. All right? I want to challenge you next week, next 2 weeks. You know who that person is in your life, and maybe there's more than one. That difficult person. That person who just eats at you, gets on your nerves. Can't stand them. Right now it might be me. That's fine. That person, though. Pray for him. Pray for him. That's what Jesus is challenging us to. He's coming here. Which gets us to our so what moment. This is the stuff I want you to try to think about next few days. Why? Try to have you write them down. The notes are important. You gotta ask those tough questions. What am I looking at? What has my time and attention? Do I need to look at the words I say and how I say them? Who do I need to pray for? What does it mean to be a person of honor this next year? These are great things. And I realize they're difficult, but they're good challenges, and they're challenges from Jesus, not mine. These are Jesus' challenges. You say, but it's hard. Yeah, being a disciple is. But it's worth it. It's worth it. You say, why? Last verse that started this passage, Matthew 5:13. Jesus began the conversation when he said, you, all of you, you're the salt of the earth. But if salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? I'll just answer that for you. It can't. You can't make salt salty again. And as a result, it's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You're the salt of the world. You give flavor to the world by shining your love. But there's a warning. And as we recalibrate, as we look into this new year, as we look at these challenges Jesus gave us, we have an opportunity to point ourselves and have that trajectory towards Him. And my prayer is that we never lose our saltiness. That we are. Jesus would follow this after that verse and say, you are the light of the world. My prayer is that we maintain that we be the light of the world, that we be the salt of the earth. So what is it in your life? Maybe stuff we've talked about today, maybe something else that you need to realign, that the trajectory needs to point towards Jesus. What's that thing you need to work on in this coming year? May we, I hope, be a church that never loses its saltiness. And may we always be a people whose light shines. Not our light, God's light. The light of Jesus. So that the world would know through us there is healing and hope. Let's pray.